All right. So lead in music. Da 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 da. That was terrible. Welcome back to Perpetual Jank Machine, a podcast about the jank that perpetually runs on your machine. Today we're going to be talking about the modern tech interview. It's quite obvious that the modern tech interview is beloved by nobody. Employers and employees, interviewers and interviewees. It's kind of a situation. I've had quite a bit of experience on both sides of the table. I've done quite a bit of interviewing for jobs, and I've done quite a bit of interviewing other people for positions at the place that I work at. I'm sure that you've had quite a bit of experience as well, Miles.
Yeah, they're great. They're my favorite thing ever. I enjoy being a part of them. I enjoy seeing them. I enjoy smelling them, feeling them, all the parts.
Interesting.
It's great. No, it's horrible.
And why do you think that, Miles? Does it have anything to do with the fact that, you're a gigantic ball of nerves both before, during, and after the interview, and it really doesn't measure your ability to do the job?
No, I think you're right about the fact that it doesn't really measure anything. It's kind of just like a crapshoot. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, so the big ball of nerves thing is just me. Okay. That's
no. I get nervous. It's just I don't think I show it or know it. I'll get in there and I'll be like, I have no idea what's going on. And it's just like a whirlwind. But suddenly for some reason, I happen to not say anything stupid.
Mm-hmm. You're just in the zone, I guess, right?
Yeah. No. I should be saying something stupid, but I get lucky.
Okay, so you're perpetually teetering on a cliff and through some divine grace.
At any moment, I could just I don't know, say the most horrible thing. One, it was just for an IT job, and they're like, hey, so this and this and this. And then I was like, oh, I got to mention the fact that I can't drive because they wanted me to go to someplace. And I knew that was going to kill the interview. But I made it even worse. I was like, so actually I can't, I don't have a vehicle that I can drive. And they're like, oh, okay. So that one was an absolute train wreck. But anyway, yeah, occasionally it does happen like that. But yeah, it's usually just a whole bunch of just weird questions that would never show up. And then they always want you to know things just off the top of your head. I got to have all of the syntax memorized of every single language and know every little obscure part.
Yeah, I think that's probably my least favorite part about interviews. I remember back when I was looking for a job way back in the day, they asked me just some question about, I think it was, how do you reset the this parameter in a JavaScript function to be what you want it to be? And I was like, well, I could memorize that, or I could just use the ES6 arrow functions that just do the right thing all the time. And he was like, okay, yeah, cool. But it's bind, by the way. The function is called bind. You might want to know that. And I'm like, okay, thanks. I didn't pass that interview.
Yeah, no, that sounds terrible. Yeah. See, it's just the chances that you know everything is pretty slim. So it's hey, am I going to get the 50% of things that I know? Some guy was like, oh, what language do you like? I'm like, I like C. And then he started asking me a whole bunch of C questions, way too intense ones. I was like, I don't know the documentation off the top of my head. Can we just do these questions for Python? And he's like, yeah.
I think that the coding test is also just kind of crappy though. Even once you get past the trivia questions, thankfully a lot of people who I've been interviewed with, I guess that's kind of my breadth of experience, they've kind of moved away, I think, from trivia questions as time has moved on, but still a coding question, I feel like my IQ just drops by 50 points when I try to do it.
Yeah. I think I don't mind the coding chat, oh, hey, write some code for us. That's not that bad, as long as it's just hey, we just want to make sure you actually know this damn language.
Yeah.
I think what they should be going for is just making sure that you're not lying, because this might be a very controversial opinion. I don't think you could ever know if you're hiring someone good or bad before you hire them.
Well, I mean, you can definitely tell someone's bad before you hire them, right? You just don't know if you hire someone good.
Just if they're a terrible employee. You can't know that.
Well, yeah, but someone who lacks the basic.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. You should filter out. Do you just know the things that you claim that you say that you know? Like that's
Yeah.
all you should be filtering for.
Right. That part I agree with. Like,
Yeah.
if I'm trying to get someone to, I don't know, do the sysops stuff and to work on Linux, but in general, I probably would want to know that if he knows the basic set, grep, whatever basic Linux functionalities there are. And if I want to do something enterprise TM, I probably want to make sure that he knows at least Java, objects, and classes. He wouldn't say something dumb like a car with a sticker is a different class than a car. Something like very basics.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what they should be filtering out for, but instead they go for like a lot of these obscure, weird things like, oh, does your personality fit with the goals of our company? It's like, dude, what the hell are you?
I mean, if any company like just straight up goes into, hey, we think we need to know your culture and whatnot, I feel like that's just a giant red flag.
Oh yeah.
I do think there's a little bit of merit to figuring out how people are with other people, especially in terms of like how they communicate with others about problems.
Yeah,
because obviously you can be the smartest person in the world, but if you're, argumentative and unable to receive feedback, and sometimes have difficulty communicating what is in your IDE to the rest of your team, then that may be a problem. Like, for example, if you were implementing
hired me.
Well, yeah, but no one's gonna tell you.
No,
hey, I get super defensive, and I don't like to talk to people if they disagree.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not
in an interview.
Like they pretend like they could figure this out somehow from these interview questions. It's like, no, like no matter what job you go to, there are like some really terrible workers there, and you're like, how did you get past the interview questions? And they're like, oh, I memorized all of JavaScript knowledge, and you're like, okay, that makes sense.
It's not supposed to be a end all be all. It's more like a readout.
Yeah. I think here's how I think the ideal job interview goes. Right? You email them your resume, and you put your cover letter as the email description.
No, they're not gonna read it.
And then once they go through the resumes and decide which people they probably want to interview, they just interview with some basic questions like, hey, we're making sure you're a sane human being that you claim to be. Like, that's all we're doing. And then I think the last interview should be like, okay, getting down to brass tacks, let's write some code, and let's just make sure that, like, you can actually, like, do the things you're claiming you can do. And I think that's basically all the info you can get out of a, because you can't get to know someone from like a freaking job interview. Like, there's no way you could. And these companies pretend that they can, and they do all these weird personality quizzes that have like absolutely no scientific backing whatsoever.
Oh yeah.
That.
And honestly, I think even if you like went to like the extreme end of the spectrum and you like somehow were able to like take that candidate like out to a bar just to like, talk with them like you would with the rest of your candidates, that would be like the most high pressure situation. Like, you're never going to get anything out of anybody just doing that. Like, I've done lunch interviews before, and that gives you a lot of time to speak with people.
Yeah.
That, like, what you think you're filtering out for is, oh, I'm going to find out exactly who they are. And what you're actually going to find out is, oh, they stutter or they don't stutter. That's like all you're going to get out of that info.
Yeah, it's really just a question of like how introverted are they, which we don't want to filter on, obviously. We don't want to discriminate on people who are introverts or extroverts just because that's really not related to how well you're going to do your job, because you could be the most introverted person ever and not have any problems talking about the format of data that you're going to send to this person over Slack.
Yeah, it's like, don't talk to me in person, just communicate over Slack, and I will be 100% fine. And like,
and like getting to know people's interests, like, again, it's not really something that you want to.
Oh yeah, that's so weird. It's like, what do you do in your free time? I'm like, I don't know, draw. That's like the most normal thing to say, other than like, I watch YouTube for 4 hours. Like what?
My go-to answer is just read. Nobody questions if I read, and so.
I mean, like, I almost feel like as a candidate, like, I wonder if they were like fishing for like whether or not like, I do a lot of coding in my free time. And I guess I'm kind of blessed that the truthful answer is yes, but like if it wasn't, like, I'd almost kind of feel compelled to like weave that in. And then that's not really answering the question, because that's kind of like technically like what you do for work almost, but like not really. It just happens to be off work hours.
Like, I think a lot of people code in their free. Like, I don't even know if that's an interesting thing to like add, because pretty much everyone codes in their free time. Even if they don't want to, they feel like they have to nowadays. I don't
know. For all it's worth, I just feel like lunch interviews makes the whole interview process 10 times more nerve-wracking for me. I'm fine with sitting down. You ask me a question, whatever. Right? Ask me to write some code. Sure. Even ask me, what kind of like past projects, hobbies, whatever. Sure, I will give you an answer. Don't fucking ask me to eat something while talking to you. I'm really not into that. I just want to.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, when the food comes, I'm a little bit more interested in the food. To be honest, like it's at the point where I wouldn't expect somebody to be talking through their food at me. I think that's a little bit unreasonable.
Oh yeah, that's really weird. Now that you mention it,
yeah, like they ask you during food time, "Hey, what have you been up to recently?" While I'm trying to slurp down the noodles in my mouth. Yeah, like, what do you want me to do? Just stop eating and answer a trivia question?
My brother in high school, he stopped eating lunch because he hated eating in front of people. So I'm just imagining him doing a stupid freaking interview and just sitting there and like staring at them while they're like eating food, and he just got like a glass of water.
Yeah. For our lunch interview, since we're going to time, do you want to join us in the cafeteria? My religion prevents me from eating lunch. Sorry. Just say that out loud, and they'll.
Oh wait, I actually ate before I came. I didn't know you were actually like doing the lunch thing for real or something.
Oh, we start at 8 a.m. though. Yeah. Well, I had it before I could show up. Please continue.
That definitely not get you the job.
Well,
imagine not getting a job because you didn't eat.
It really feels like a coin toss there.
Anyway.
I mean,
yeah.
thankfully, that's not really.
I didn't know that was a thing. If I'm going to be honest.
The lunch interview. I've had a couple of them actually as a candidate, and I've given a couple as an interview,er. And
gosh.
Honestly, I mean, when it comes to like the debrief, I'm just like, we had lunch.
When you do you ever like sit down with the person who tells you what you're supposed to do and be like, why are we doing any of this? Why don't we just do something normal?
Well, a lot of interviewers have a script to follow that was kind of considered to be best practices.
Yeah, so you never questioned it. You just follow orders. Gotcha.
We do have some input on it, but my input is distributed among the input of 100 other people. So
gotcha. Makes sense.
There's only so much you can do. I mean, I can influence like what types of questions I might ask.
Yeah.
I mean, I might be supposed to ask a coding question, but I can decide, from a bank of questions that, are known to be of reasonable difficulty of, I can choose one of those for sure.
Yeah,
because
Okay.
I might be able to get better information out of a specific type of question just because I am very familiar with that type of work, or because I feel like that question happens to be the right difficulty for this specific candidate or something like that. But it's generally quite standardized, and especially on like even the personality parts of the interview, there's a lot of like example questions you can ask, and obviously you can try to tailor it to each person to get, I suppose, the most descriptive information out of people.
Gosh.
How do you get this?
And to figure out,
personality exams.
Well, if they have, for example, a particular interest, and that there's a group with that particular interest, be it technical or social, I can perhaps ask that question to see if they are somebody who enjoys that and somebody who may fit well into that group. And obviously, I can put that through in the in feedback to say this person is very interested in XYZ technical thing, which I know that we are very interested in pursuing in the next X months. So that might be something that I could do to help them perhaps stand out or better assess them through criteria that we're currently trying to assess.
How genuine is the question about, hey, what's your hobbies or what do you like? Because at that point, you're really trying to see, hey, can I answer this in such a way that gives me extra points in the future?
Yeah. Like if I know they're working on this thing, like, oh, that'll make me more likely to actually seem like I fit within this company.
Yeah,
I try to never ask like a blanket what's your hobbies question to people, because that's just so broad, and I feel like the answers to that can vary wildly based on helpfulness, based on how well you have trained for technical interviews, because you may be a very good fit for the job, but you just might not have read the 6 books on technical interviews that say, what to say when you're talking about your hobbies that, are most likely to be good fits within the company and most likely to produce a positive note on an interview debrief.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas the person who is probably who could be a better fit for the job, who has not read those 6 books and frankly would not really benefit from reading those 6 books and their ability to perform at this company, they're going to say something that will not get them that note. So it kind of disadvantages them, I feel. I feel like it's trying to filter along an axis that doesn't matter. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that happens with like pretty much every job. It's like, oh, that guy has tattoos. It's like that has literally nothing to do with what we're like trying to hire.
Yeah, generally, I feel like a lot of technical organizations that I've been on both sides of the table for are not too deterred by that anymore.
No, not that specifically. I'm just like, throwing something out there.
I don't think that's really much of a problem, at least for the organizations that I've interviewed and have interviewed for.
Yeah.
But a lot of it's still just based on technical knowledge. I gotta say though, the technical knowledge is definitely a big filtering thing, and I'm still not sure that we've really cracked that nut.
What do you mean by that?
So, like the whiteboarding, I feel like I'm always kind of cautious about it because I feel like it takes too much of a role in technical interviews nowadays. I feel like a lot of times a person's only exposure, and this is true of a lot of organizations that I've interviewed at, your only exposure to this one person who is going to be like, half or a fourth of the people who are judging you is just through a technical question. And I feel like that is a very weighty, that's a really heavy weight to put on one specific thing, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's kind of like you're taking a college course and 80% of the grade is your midterm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but except you have 4 midterms, right? If you have 4 interviews, kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess that kind of does spread out among multiple interviews. So that's the other thing is like, I guess interviews are more about filtering out candidates because I guess it's a lot more costly to hire somebody who's not going to perform well than to turn down somebody who might have been a good fit. But
and I feel like nowadays, at least from my interview experience, well, they don't ask trivia questions, which is a huge, obvious thing they should have done. I don't know. I don't really think trying to figure out why a manhole is circular really helps me do my job. But
wait, what?
Up to that. Yeah,
I haven't heard that one before.
Popular question: why is the manhole cover circular, not square or whatever other shape there is? And like there are a bunch of correct answers to that. Basically, you can say, well, it reduces the risk of the cover actually falling into the manhole because unlike a square, you can rotate it to actually make it fit in. A circle never fits in there, kind of thing. But yeah, like, see, those trivia questions, they have like entire books for them just to say, hey.
Okay, my best experiences with interviewing have been like small, boring companies, like that small company that makes like air conditioners or something like that. And then they're like, okay, email me your resume. Put whatever you want in the description of your email. I'll look over it. And then they look over it and they're like, okay, I'm going to have our HR person call you to make sure you're a sane person. I'm like, okay. And then after that, they just ask you some questions. They're like, okay, we work with these technologies. Are you familiar with which ones of these technologies are you familiar with? And you're like, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, just some general questions to ask if you know about these technologies. And they ask some questions. And then maybe there's a coding challenge, or probably that's it. Yeah, and it's that. I think that's just the way to go because it's simple, it's normal, it filters out what you're looking for, and jump like that.
How do you feel about whiteboarding? Do you feel like that is?
It's not bad necessarily, but I think the questions are always really weird. Like I think if you want to do whiteboarding, it's like, okay, imagine this is the project that we're assigned. How would you break down this project into like the pieces that you think, just project planning or something like that? Like, oh, what do you think we need to do to break down this project and what it needs to happen?
That's
and you're like,
oh, whiteboarding.
We'd probably.
Or are you saying that you'd rather do that for whiteboarding?
I think that would be the ideal whiteboarding question. Like you give like, okay, like here's the project. And you're like, okay, so we'd probably need some form of back end. So we'd probably have some people on the back end. And
if you interview with those kind of questions, like from my experience, that may work for, I guess, like a smaller company where you give them more autonomy. But like, for larger companies, if you're, freshly hired, you're not going to be given those kind of autonomous decision-making process.
No. I don't think that's what that question would be like about. I think that kind of question would be like, oh, hey, like, do you know what this project would probably involve? Like, you know what I'm saying? Have you had experience doing these kinds of things?
Right. All I'm saying is that whatever that question is going to be testing, it's not going to be useful in your day-to-day work at that point.
I think it would. Like, just knowing
you're not really going to be able.
Like, we're building a website. What does building a website mean? Like, what do you need? What needs to get done in order for a website to get built? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but like, and once you start working there, you're not going to be building a website. You're going to be building whatever particular component they want you to work on.
Yeah, but knowing that your component fits within the grand scheme of things, I think, is very important. I could agree with that.
Do you feel like the importance rises or falls as you may be interviewing perhaps a junior or a senior dev? Do you feel like that's more important for a different type of position?
Much more important for.
You might be right. It might be a bad question, but I think what I'm like, just not something super abstract. Just like, like, hey, here's.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Basically, what we're working on as a company. Like, do you know about these things that I'm talking about?
I do feel like that's a little bit better than just being asked to solve like elite code hard on a whiteboard, because you're already being like cognitively loaded up just by trying to like perform in front of people.
Yeah.
So you're only operating at maybe like 70 or 50% mental bandwidth, and then you're also taking a question that is also going to use up as much bandwidth as it can take just to figure out to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And to
but it often boils down to like, do you happen to know about this algorithm already or not? Because if you try to figure out this algorithm all on your own, like on the spot, it's probably going to go pretty poorly in that interview.
Well,
but the one kid who happens to be like, oh, I know this sorting algorithm is going to do fine.
And even if you do figure out the algorithm, like, I feel like there's a lot of pressure that's being put on you where you may be disadvantaged in a way that is not consistent across all people. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was actually looking online today, and I saw this NC State study that showed a 50% performance improvement on whiteboarding questions if you just take the person evaluating them out of the room, and they show like significantly fewer stress markers. So I think that could be a big variant in between interviewees, especially because not the same person isn't going to be interviewing every single person. So if you have somebody who may be, I guess, butting in more, or who may appear in the candidate's eyes to be perhaps a bit more intimidating or something, I think that could potentially disproportionately affect the results in a way that is not really something that you're trying to include.
Yeah, but this is a uniform, like that's not a problem with the whiteboarding itself, right? That is the environment that surrounds it, and it's kind of a uniform distribution kind of thing. Like, yeah, sure, interviewee X might be, some type of nervous or stressed out but interviewee Y may not be. And so while it's possible that X may have been a better fit, it also could be possible Y has been a better fit. It is possible for us to say, hey, let's try to improve the process by removing some of the stress markers. But that's just an improvement to the environment. The core fundamental is that if a whiteboard test, you're trying to see if the candidate can code or can start to reason about what needs to be done before going into it.
Yeah.
That part is really the core of what becomes a whiteboard problem. And so I feel like that part is the part
that took away the whiteboard problem and you just put them in a room with a computer which is disconnected from the internet probably, and just left them alone for 30 minutes. I have a feeling that would be a much better...
Well, at that point,
I've had an interview where they didn't disconnect. They're like, "Yeah, you can search whatever you want." I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right."
I suppose the question is whether or not the problem has been very obviously solved on the internet.
Yeah. You should not.
I mean, if you're confident that it's bespoke, then I guess that doesn't matter, and just let them be on Stack Overflow all they want. But if you're asking them to solve something that's in textbooks, then it might be a good idea to.
This is like a common problem in freaking like AI design, because you want your goals to align with what you're actually testing for. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I want the AI to learn how to do this. And then you come up with some like goal set, like a score measure. Oh, how good is the AI at doing this? And if you make a crappy score thing, it'll like find some like glitchy way how to like get a high score without actually learning anything important.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's what I'm getting at is it's not an easy problem to solve, but I think companies kind of pretend like it is, and then they come up like they basically just hire like other companies to like come up with these weird solutions that are never tested.
There are a lot of vendors out there that do provide example coding problems.
Exactly, like stuff like that.
I'm sure that a lot of the automated stuff that you get through emails, like as your first screener. A lot of that is through vendors.
Do companies ever like try out these programs with their developers that currently work there? Like, hey, we want to make sure this our interview thing actually makes sense. Like, could you try one of these?
Has interviewed people, I've always made sure that the question I'm asking is something that I have the solution to written down, either on my work laptop in case of emergency, or I might even just print out a copy of it.
No, just like running have you ever tried the questions with the developers like that currently work there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's like a lot of questions that are asked during the interviews are kind of homebrews. You grab a few people from your nearby cubicle and say, hey, what do you think of this question? They're like, yeah, I can't solve it in like 10 minutes or what? You have to describe it to me in 15 minutes or more.
This is true. If you are just coding a solution to a problem alone, I guess you are kind of at an advantage.
Actually make them go through like the interview process a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like not just, oh, hey, do you know that? Like actually make them do the whiteboarding question and then just like sit there, pretend like
ask them to solve it. Ask them to come up with a solution.
Yeah.
15 minutes ish.
Would that only be for bespoke questions, or would that also be from questions from a vendor? Because they are kind of, a lot of vendors do like tag their questions by difficulty. So.
Yeah. I that was just a genuine question. I didn't know if companies like ran their questions by other, like current developers, because I feel like you would probably be able to learn whether the question's crappy or not a lot.
Yeah, of course. You wouldn't ask a question that you can't solve or solve in time, right?
Yeah, I can't speak for everybody for sure, but I feel like a lot of it is the vendors that do provide these questions have a much greater breadth of data about. A lot will even like tell you like what. Specifically like what percentage got it to, this runtime, what percentage got it to this runtime. So there are metrics that you can use. Obviously, you're probably going to be discouraged from selecting a question where only 1% of people got the right answer.
Maybe you want to hire 1% of the candidates.
I guess if you're Google, that might be too high for you. But
it's a hard problem to solve. I know I ran about it a lot, but it's not an easy problem to figure out.
It's more questionable, like at least for me, that the biggest pain points are the pre-interview process, and then like I mentioned before, the launch interview.
Yeah, like
pre-interview process. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Like you have to retype in your resume, and then you're pretty sure they probably won't look through your resume because you had to type everything in, and some stuff in your resume didn't fit in one of the categories, so you had to just leave it out.
Which is so bloody strange, because every single time I've gotten like a pre-interview package, it's just been their resume verbatim and a cover letter sometimes.
Exactly. Like, why can't I just, once again, email you my damn resume like a normal person?
And that's so much better than what their solution for like, sending in like specific fields would be, because I can actually like see how it's formatted and see what they think the most important thing is.
I know. It's so like, it just seems so crazy that all companies have swapped away from doing that. Like it just, because it seems like it takes more time for the person looking over the thing. Like I had an interview where I had to pre-record a whole bunch of questions and send it into them. I know someone's not going to sit through 15 minutes of footage for each candidate before they even like look at my resume. Like that's not a thing that's happening.
Well, maybe someone just paid with a lot of free time.
Oh my gosh. I hope not.
I mean, yeah, the administrative and, the bureaucratic pains aside, it's just slow, and usually at that point what they're sending you is a bunch of random questions for you to solve, and sure, I'm happy to solve them. Like I've had one experience where they just basically emailed me, hey, this is the problem, hey, this is an example data set, and solve this, and that's it. I'm given a really vague description. I pretty much had no idea what they wanted to test out.
Yeah,
I had someone to sit there and say, hey, this is the right approach, or hey, this is the wrong approach, or hey, we are not really thinking of that. Can you try a different approach? Like, I don't really know what you're asking about. And vague descriptions and completely hands off just means I pretty much spent the whole night until because they sent it in the evening, which is even worse. I pretty much spent the whole night thinking of every possible angle they wanted to approach at and say, hey, if you wanted to look for this is a possible solution. But if you wanted to test that, here's a second alternative that has small modification solutions.
Yeah,
I quoted 3 examples and said, hey, I really didn't know which you're looking for or how you wanted to approach it in the end. You said this is what you wanted to look for, but you didn't really handle the edge case or anything like that. You just said, solve the question. So I had to solve 3 questions. Hope you're happy. I mean, I didn't write the last part in the email, but that's pretty much my sentiment after that.
Oh my God. Yeah, I feel that so much. I had a thing like that where it was just like a pretty open-ended question. And they sent it to me like around finals week of like 1 year. And it was like, hey, could we like postpone this? Like, oh my gosh, please. And like, no. And I was like, are you serious?
No.
And I had to like study for like 12 hours. And then I had to stay up another 12 hours to send it in. And then I sent it in and they give me no feedback. They just ghosted me after that. And I'm just like, are you serious? I stayed up all night doing this, and then you ghost me? You don't even give me a letter of rejection?
Oh, no, it's just the postpone guy. Yeah, let's not read his email or reply to him ever again.
Oh,
unfortunately. I guess, okay, maybe that's why I've been a little more positively spoken about like in-person and whiteboard interviews specifically. It's because they have, most of the time, if they're done by, somewhat competent interviewer, most of the time they have a question, they know the solution, and they know what they're trying to find. At that point, I don't know the answer because, they usually ask at least medium or hard question, right? Mm-hmm. At that point, I don't really know the solution, and I just kind of probe around and see like what I'm supposed to do, because if you know the answer and you see me sitting there for 20 minutes straight, not doing anything, might as well give me a hint. And we usually go from there, and there have been at least 2 interview rounds where I didn't really arrive at a solution, and they said, we didn't really expect you to arrive at one because we know the solution, and only people who have done it before arrive at the solution there exactly. We just wanted to see how you do, like talking to a fellow.
Yeah.
I'm like, and I guess that's really borne out by the fact that like half of the stuff on like r/CS career questions isn't really about the material of getting hired or what specifically you're speaking about in interviews, but it's more like, hey, I'm interviewing with X company. Do they ghost people? What is their timeline? How are their HR people? Will they ask you to do this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which I feel like the actual meat of the interview that you see when you actually get to the table is a really tough question to solve. But I also feel like all the stuff surrounding that is a pretty easy question to solve. And I feel like the whole process might be made a whole lot easier if you can just knock out those low-hanging fruits as well.
Yeah, like even though it's the tough question I never solved, at least that makes me feel more human because I'm talking to someone who probably knows the solution and at least talks to me and responds. Mm-hmm. The rest of the interview process just, hey, you haven't sent the required cover letter and resume package second time into a different website because the previous website has been deprecated. Have you considered sending that again? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't notice the fine print where I have to zoom in 50% to actually read that, hey, this website has been deprecated. Please send at a fellow new website.
That's so accurate. Oh my gosh.
That's what I consider to be a big pain point. Like, it's just, they don't ghost me. Hey, they're also talking to me and, hey, I'm actually going to get an interview. And, hey, I get to talk to new people, actual people. Nice. Okay. Now the hard part is over. I can actually solve a hard question instead of, hey, the HR haven't responded to me in 3 weeks. Are they gonna reply? Hey, I'm trying to arrange the hotel and flight process. Do you have a set date and time? Hey, we're gonna talk about like when would they get back to me about the decision making process? And hey, if they said no, do they have a hiring freeze or blacklist or anything like that? It's just, I'm just trying to get a job about coding. Asking me about coding, like the rest of the bureaucratic process, they're there. Don't make me feel how horrible it is.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
Definitely the worst interview experiences that I've had as a candidate have been solely because of process decisions. It's never been, the content of the interview when I'm sitting at the table. It's always been ghosting or exploding offers that explode after like some irrationally short amount of time, or hey, can you fly down to Texas so you can schmooze with these people even though we've already pretty much made our decision. I'm sure people who have been everybody who's interviewed for that company is going to know what I'm talking about. But that is something that happened to me. And I think that was like during finals week too. So I was like, hey, no.
Some company did want to fly me out to Texas.
Oh, unfortunate. That does make me kind of curious if that's something unique to tech company interview process, or everyone just feels equally pained out by interview process for whatever job. I mean, if I want to interview for McDonald's, they are not gonna like be that painful with it. So,
oh, you'd be surprised.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I have no idea.
I don't want to be.
Well, I guess we can save that as a topic for a later time. Dali.
Is there a way to pronounce it?
I think so, because it's based on Salvador Dali and also Wally. So, like,
yeah,
Dali.
I thought the name was kind of terrible, and I did pick up on the Wally reference.
Ah.
The name might be terrible, but it is really cool software, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those who may not know, who may be listening, this is OpenAI's latest project. It effectively lets you type in some text, and it gives you an image of it, regardless of how convoluted that text is, up to a certain point. It has some trouble with logical reasoning, but if you ask it to make a chair in the shape of an avocado, it'll give you a whole bunch of chairs in the shape of an avocado.
Ooh, that's exciting.
So if you're an avocado-related furniture design firm, I would start looking for ways to pivot.
I do love how obscure these open AI projects are. Like, they're clearly just research right now, because like you're like, where would I ever use this?
I don't know. I could think of quite a few places to do this. Like, imagine if you want an icon of something really specific for like your website. This could probably get you like 80% of the way there, rather than hiring somebody on Fiverr.
That'd be weird. Hey, an AI made this design. Hey, could you actually draw this up in vector art?
Or just touching it up. I mean, if you don't need an SVG out of it, then just get it, remove maybe the one weird bit in the corner, and then you have it.
Well, it doesn't even have to be that. I can totally get behind this idea because, say, okay, take an example of let's say we go with the avocado. I want to really make an avocado-shaped logo or avocado-related logo, right? So I feed that into the prompt, and it will generate me hopefully something avocado-related. But if imagination is not really, well, imagination, quote unquote, as if an AI has one, right? It's just limited, if not limited by whatever we think of, right? So at that point, whatever a logo designer can look at it and say, oh, wow, I would never have came up with that idea. Let me just draw something that is inspired by this avocado chair, and let's just roll with that as the logo. At that point, they don't have to use the image at all. It's just something inspired by it, because whatever that's spat out by the machine is totally nonsensical and probably a lot more free-flowing and less constrained than human imaginations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be modifying the original image or fixing up the corners. It can just be, let's take random inspirations kind of thing.
Yeah. No, all I'm saying is I think this is obviously more of a proof of concept than like an actual marketable product. Not that it couldn't have uses, although I doubt they were like making this and be like, wow, this will revolutionize the graphic design space. Like, you know what I'm saying? That probably wasn't what they were going with.
I mean, I'm sure that is kind of the end goal, but in this stage, yes. I did read that it took about like 4.6 million to train GPT-3 at like the cheapest GPU cloud provider that there is, like currently. So I couldn't imagine somebody wanting to drop that amount of money on something that could make icon design a little bit easier or to make conceptualization easier. I'm sure if you have a cool use for it, you know, you can, I'm sure they're going to open up an API for it at some point.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure when that point's going to be, because that it does already exist for GPT-3, but this is, I feel like, a little bit easier to exploit potentially. I mean, there have been papers of people gathering personal information out of GPT-2 with the right prompts. You can give it some like specific, maybe 3-word prompt, and it'll just spit out whatever personal information that it trained on. That might
I never even
prompt.
thought about that. That's actually really. I didn't even know that was a thing. That's insane.
So if it was trained on, for example, and I'm sure this was of no malicious intent. There's just so much crap that it was trained on. It's impossible to filter all of it.
Yeah.
Let's say that it was maybe trained on some security camera footage of something that could be personally compromising to somebody, but, you know, is above board and, you know, just kind of embarrassing, right? Like that, we wouldn't want that to be publicly released, obviously.
Yeah.
No,
like we wouldn't want to make a whole bunch of like new Kim Kardashians out of this. That would be quite bad.
Taking the word social engineering to a different standpoint, I see.
But I think the point of it, right, is to like, you know, allude at like, you know, like, oh, maybe one day we could type in a description of a app or a computer program and it writes all the code for you, and then you could just like modify a couple lines and have it exactly the way you want, despite never considering how the code might be written or something like that.
Yeah, I am kind of hesitant to say that it will be easily applied to software engineering just because statistical styles of AIs are often a lot fuzzier than you would reasonably want for something that is so logically rigorous. Mm-hmm. However, I think that with the resurgence of statistical AI, obviously there was the first surge of AI around, you know, the 60s and 70s with the study of perceptrons, and then later the study of symbolic AI. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that the resurgence now is almost a harbinger for the resurgence of symbolic AI as well, because a lot of the reasons that the AI winter happened was we just didn't have the computing power because, I mean, back then we had like a PDP-11, and we were running that over these ontologies that were so incredibly enormous, and the algorithms on there were so incredibly, I suppose, inefficient that you couldn't get anything useful done with them. But now we have like ridiculous computing power, just absolutely insane computing power. And even though these statistical AIs are able to be accelerated a lot more easily because of GPUs, because they're really amenable to vector and matrix calculations, which happen to be the fastest means of getting things done on conventional silicon, mm-hmm. it's possible that we could see some resurgence of a more constrained, more logical symbolic AI to assist that as well, which I think is really exciting. But I guess we'll have to see whether that takes off. Because there are currently programs where you can write the specification or like the tests for a function, and it will implement that function for you like most of the time. Sometimes it'll just spin forever, but most of the time it'll come back with something cool.
Right, but that's pretty much predetermined, and there's not a lot of random processing involved, right? That's why they can behave as what you expect it would, because they are kind of still logical and designed by a human, or with a human take part in it. If you look at, for example, DALL-E and ask it to generate something logical, like fill in an IQ exam at the bottom right corner, or just generate 3 cubes according to specification, it doesn't do that well. It tends to get confused by relational concepts and whatnot. So
that's true. But imagine if you took a relational symbolic AI and you had it just, you know, hash out the relational core of the problem. And again, I have no idea how to specify this. Somebody will probably figure it out in the next 50 years, but I'm not that person. And then you feed it into DALL-E to do the window dressing.
Maybe. I just feel like the problem of something symbolic, logical, and relational may not really translate well to matrix math and whatnot, because they rely on the fact that things can be fuzzy and, you know, determined by coefficients and whatnot.
Programming can be very fuzzy. Let's be honest here. Sometimes we write in code that is definitely not the correct way of doing things, but it still works.
Well, that's kind of like symbolically fuzzy. That's not like writing like, you know, 5 semicolons after one another and 3 opening braces and 2 closing braces because you hit a weird spot in the matrix.
Well, generates terrible code all the time. It works, and then you have to pay software developers to fix it.
Wow, that is a new way of software development, where you only just generate with specifications and ask your developers to only fix the code.
We become like code doctors.
No, but it's like that.
I like this. Get this man some VCs.
No. All I was saying is like, it's a proof of concept that shows that, like, you know, something more could possibly be done with this. Like, you know, obviously they weren't programming an AI to actually beat people at Dota tournaments. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, I still think it is really cool, and I hope that it is eventually released as an API, though, because there are so many cool things you could do with this, and there's so many evil things that you could do with this. So I'm curious.
To find out what evil things will be done with it.
I'm a little apprehensive, but I'm curious, and I'm glad that we do have the capability to do something like that now, because frankly, I thought that something like this was going to happen much later than it has. I figured I was going to be much older when I was reading this article.
That makes me a little confused. It's called OpenAI, but I just know what they do. Never the part that's open is never, hey, what you did. I guess I can read the papers, but they're not going to be in detail of what you did.
They did release GPT-2 publicly, and then GPT-3 came around, and it was really, really good. And I think there might have, I mean, of course, there were probably some cynical reasons to keep it behind a paywall, for sure. But I think that it's also quite possible that they didn't want to fund the next fake news empire with their technology.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Obviously, this isn't, going to prevent somebody else, some other actor, from coming up with this in parallel and then just releasing it or doing with it as they please. And I think potentially keeping it behind an API or behind, this little gate might actually impede one's ability to, I suppose, work against it or make it more, or figure out, the quirks of this in such a way that you can tell whether something was AI generated. I think that is probably something that is going to be very important.
There's always the AI that can tell if something's AI generated.
We're getting to the Blade Runner. Okay.
No, they had an AI who could tell if images were photoshopped and stuff like that. And they also trained AIs to trick AIs. It modifies the image with a little bit of what looks like static. It just modifies the pixels a little bit, and it makes something think that a plant is a walrus or something like that.
This is true, but you can't do that if you only have the output. If I have an output that looks about something, some weird fake news article that says that 5G causes dogs to turn pink, then how can I tell if I don't have access to the original AI?
If I remember correctly, the problem was some AIs. For example, one way to tell was they start with a writing prompt, oh, so and so did this, and it kind of steers away from the prompt in general. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't care about what it was talking about at the beginning of the paragraph. By the end of it, you're whoa, you got way off topic there, kind of situation.
That's true. I guess it does depend on how much post-processing there is as well by humans.
Yeah, so you could reliably, you can reliably tell certain things are faked if you're just a human, much less another AI that's specifically been trained to tell if something's fake. Or what's that one where you take a picture of someone? You can recreate a video of someone speaking with just one photo. That was in the news for a while because everyone was oh no.
I think they're called deep fakes.
Yeah, deep fakes. You can, if you look carefully, you can tell if it's That
just means the technology hasn't got there yet, which.
When there's a fifth gen of GPT, are we going to be able
to? What I'm saying is there are subtleties that another AI can usually pick up on and, differentiate whether something's fake or real. So it's not that big of a deal.
That's why I had the question about the open in OpenAI, right? And then, sure, I assume I have to believe that there's a committee behind OpenAI that determines whether or not AI is ready for public and whether or not that's, hazard or danger to public, either safety or information or anything like that. And now, how do I find out what this committee is about with the quote unquote moral committee or moral commissions for?
I think it might just be organized as a private company. I think the open might just be because that was the intent initially, but
yeah, right. That's why it's called OpenAI initially. It's just to say, hey, let's make sure AI can be safe for a tool for humanity, not a danger to it. But I really fail to see how it's open nowadays, right? And that just makes me a little.
So another interesting thing that OpenAI did was they released, I believe at the same time, another AI called Clip, which determined how good of a match between an image some text was, or it might be the other way around, or probably doesn't matter. So you can also use that to connect it to DALL-E and then just filter based on a threshold of how Clip sees it, how good that result is. So that would also potentially let you get much better results as from DALL-E as it currently stands without having to manually filter through them. So that is another way of going about it, for sure.
I feel like that just completes a cycle. Let DALL-E generate from prompt, and then let Clip connect it, and then depending on how well the connection is, ask Dolly to generate another batch until you have found a acceptable sample by clip, and then present that.
I wonder if that's just the other half of the other part of the GAN, like the classifier.
That's what I'm thinking. That just like at this point, it's just really a GAN. The clip is the clip is the adversary at this point, right? Trying to differentiate that. Well, yeah. I guess to be a GAN, you really have to have something that is correct, and the adversary is trying to differentiate between.
Yeah, I'm wondering how they managed to differentiate that, because obviously if you're feeding it into the same thing twice, like that's not going to be.
They had an intern sit at the computer and make sure everything was good.
Well, and that way you have just described post-scarcity average human job. If the class.
You've also described every single undergrad AI project literally ever.
Oh, you're not wrong. I had.
Okay. That is bringing up some painful memories. I would like to not think about.
Oh, so much data cleaning.
Yeah. We were just
so much somebody sitting in the front row with a laptop keying in wire N.
Oh my
gosh. If it was that simple, it's fine. No, most of the tasks we were given is more like, hey, here's a terabyte. Well, not a terabyte. I'm exaggerating. Hey, here's a huge load of images. Box over each potential object according to these categories.
Oh.
It was so painful. Like, if I had answered yes or no, I'd be so much happier. No, I have to drag, start typing, check over the list to see if there's any potential object I missed. All right.
Oh, you guys are talking about actual AI projects. I was talking about fake AI projects that people call AI, but they're not.
Oh, I was going to say at that point, the intern is the AI, but no.
Yes.
No, I have also had to do mine was with like paragraphs. Read this paragraph, find out which category it fits in. And I'm like, oh.
But no, like, see, post-scarcity. Everything is done by a robot where, resource production, resource processing, it's all done by a robot. Your only job as human is to classify, to generate more data. You don't get to do anything else.
Yeah.
Even that's something to think about.
Anyway, it's an impressive tech demo. That's all. That's the moral of the story.
Definitely agreed. I wish that I could play with it, but they've given us a lot of cases in the tech demo to play with, so that was very impressive, I'd say.
I've looked at some of the images. They look a little like bland, if that makes sense. Like a little, just so you could definitely tell that it was gentle.
Yeah, like this doesn't really seem to be ready for full blown high resolution photos, but like for cartoony stuff for sure, it's almost all the way there.
Yeah, it's
Which is,
you can always join the waitlist if you want to actually try it hands-on with the API.
I've heard that joining the waitlist for a lot of those projects is kind of just a question of who you know and how impressive you can make your project sound. So I think somebody just joining as a toy around with it might be shuttled toward the bottom. However, if you do want to get it, make a nice website, tweet at the CEO maybe, tweet at the engineers, social engineer your way in.
Social engineer my win, and so I can do some social engineering with the GPT-3. That sounds like a horrible prospect.
It's just a feedback loop.
All right, I think that was a good discussion, guys. Thanks for chatting, and catch you guys later.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
And that's the show. Thanks to Meydän, that's Meyda with an umlaut N, for their track The Beauty of Maths, licensed under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license, which serves as our intro, outro, and interlude music. You can find more in the description of this episode. Please remember that the opinions expressed in this production may not reflect those of other participants on the show, or those of any participants' past, current, or future employers. They're also probably exaggerated a bit for comedy's sake. Anyway, thanks for tuning in.